The protest document was useless before she signed it. Admiral Sarah Voss knew this the way she knew the smell of recycled air and bad coffee, not by thinking about it, but because it had been true long enough to become structural. She signed it anyway. 31 years of signing things that disappeared into the Consortium's bureaucratic belly, stamped, filed, forgotten. She set the stylus down. Outside the viewport, Earth turned blue and white and indifferent. Lieutenant Marco appeared at the door, young, sharp, a face that hadn't learned yet how to hide what it was thinking. He was thinking she looked tired. 3 Velhari dreadnoughts crossed the pale boundary at 4:30, he said. No intent filing, no communication. Of course not. Where are they headed? Mirror colony. 52,000 people. Biodome farmers. Voss walked to the tactical display. 3 red markers moved in slow formation, vast, unhurried, the way things move when they don't believe anything can touch them. The pale was the boundary the Consortium had drawn 211 years ago, politely, with the careful diplomatic language of a civilization that considered itself kind. A protected developing species. That was what the charter said. Humanity had been classified, catalogued, placed behind a line for its own good. 60,000 people had died at Kepler Colony because the Consortium had decided a blockade was the cleanest way to enforce a trade restriction. No weapons fired, just ships in the way. Stopping food convoys, stopping medicine, stopping the supply runs that kept a colony alive. 6 months. A lesson the Velhari High Arbiter had called it afterward. A necessary demonstration of the limits of unilateral human action. 60,000 people. A lesson. Get me Ganymede on the secure channel, Voss said. You know which one. Director Holly's crane sounded like gravel in a tin can and delivered all news flat and precise the way a man reads a parts list. 87 arrays at full charge. Ganymede primary lance at 98.4%. Colony arrays all green. We've been green for 11 days. 11 days. She hadn't slept well in 11 days. Mirror Ridge installation came online 6 weeks ahead of schedule. A pause that might have been pride on a different kind of man. Your daughter-in-law's engineering team. Voss said nothing for a moment. Her daughter-in-law Lena, who had kept the name Voss after everything, who had raised the grandchildren Voss saw twice a year on video calls, who had poured her grief into blueprints and tunnel surveys and decades of quiet work in sealed underground facilities that appeared on no Consortium map. Lena had never once said the word Kepler to her. She didn't need to, it was in every rivet. Tell me the lances are ready, Voss said, not a question. It hadn't been a question for 3 years. She said it because the checking was itself a kind of faith. They are ready, Admiral. She closed the channel and opened a second one to mirror Colony's Ridge Operations Center. The voice that answered was Lena's, steady low, carrying something underneath it that Voss recognized, grief converted, shaped into something that could hold a purpose. Sarah, Lena. How are the arrays? Aligned in green. We're ready. 52,000 people were living their lives below, growing food, teaching children, watching the same sky humans had always watched. Voss looked at the dreadnought markers on her display. Stand by, she said. Standing by, Lena answered. High Arbiter Thesavin Kale was 340 years old and he was bored. He had spent 2 centuries in observation decks exactly like this one, designed to make whoever stood in them feel appropriately small. He no longer felt small. He felt what he always felt, bored. Below the viewport, mirror colony spread across the surface like something that had learned to organize itself. Biodomes glowing green against brown. Roads and small lives contained neatly within the pale, exactly as the Consortium had intended. Manageable. The word was not unkind. His intelligence officer Sarav read the standard threat assessment. Terran Defense Fleet, 43 light military vessels, chemical propellant, fission reactors, hull penetration risk against Velhari Dreadnought class, negligible, FTL capability, 0. No meaningful advances from the data collected 17 years ago, everything exactly as expected. Take us into low orbit, Kale said. Standard demonstration profile. 3 dreadnoughts moved the way they always moved, with the gravity of things that had no reason to hurry. Mirror Colony's traffic control was polite and professional. Kale's team filed a navigation survey declaration. Technically sufficient, technically a survey. The humans had received it, stamped it, and gone quiet. That was the correct response. The only response available to them. Then his tactical officer spoke in a voice that carried something careful. High Arbiter. There is a structural feature on the equatorial ridge not in our survey records. On the display, a series of large cylindrical structures, evenly spaced along the ridgeline, each 40 meters in diameter, connected by infrastructure conduits. The whole arrangement ran for several kilometers along the high ground, industrial facilities, possibly, no energy signatures matching anything in our database. Kale looked at the cylinders. Long, aligned. Sequential, each one positioned to feed into the next in a clear directional line. His science attaché Dreva spoke quietly from the back of the room. She had been on his staff for 3 months and had the habit of reading everything whether asked or not. High Arbiter. Those cylinders, they are pointing at a 40-degree elevation angle, bearing directly toward our current position. The observation deck went still. What are they? Kale said. I don't know. We have no matching profile in the human technology database. Whatever they run on, our sensors don't recognize it. Things we don't recognize. He looked at the cylinders, then at his 3 dreadnoughts on the display, then at the cylinders again. Sarov, the threat assessment. How old is the underlying data? Most recent direct observation, 11 years ago. The model was updated 4 years ago with extrapolated projections based on extrapolated. Yes, high arbiter. So they had assessed what they expected humans to have, based on what they had seen 11 years ago. The cylinders did not move, did not glow, did not show a single emission his sensors could identify. And that silence, where data should have been, was the first thing in a very long time that had made him feel something he didn't immediately have a name for. Not fear, something quieter than fear. The feeling a man gets when he realizes, in the middle of a familiar room, that a piece of furniture has moved, and he cannot remember moving it. Begin approach withdrawal, he said, before the withdrawal was complete. His communications officer spoke. High Arbiter, second transmission from the colony surface, from the Mirror Ridge Operations Center, addressed to us directly. 3 sentences, a formal greeting, a notification that Terran Authority had filed a protest, and then a request that the Velhari Patrol please maintain its current altitude and heading for the next 4 minutes, to allow for the safe completion of a routine technical calibration at the Ridge Operations Center. Maintain current altitude, routine technical calibration. He looked at the cylinders pointing upward at a 40-degree angle, a bearing intersecting precisely with where his ships were. All ships, he said. Maximum withdrawal speed. Now, tactical room on Voss's station smelled like hot equipment and 40 people who understood what was about to happen and had decided not to talk about it. She had been there for 6 hours. The targeting systems team, 4 people who had spent 11 years learning to operate equipment that had officially never existed, sat in a row along the far wall, hands in their laps, eyes on their screens. Nobody sat the way people sit when they're relaxed. The Velhari Patrol had gone into withdrawal 11 minutes ago. She didn't know why Kale had ordered it. She didn't particularly care. What she cared about was the geometry. The plan had never been to destroy the patrol. The plan was to demonstrate something, to show the Consortium, in language they had never heard before and could not argue with, that the calculation had changed. 3 rods, kinetic energy measured in numbers that made engineers go quiet, not at the ships, in front of them, at precise intercept vectors that would force each dreadnought to maneuver or take damage. Ships maneuvering in a panic told a story. Ships that had never needed to panic in 200 years of Imperial patrol work. Those ships were a message every other empire in the Consortium would read immediately. The math was the message. Fire solution is on your board, Director. Confirm receipt. Confirmed. 3 rods mirror primary array launch sequence 7. Target vectors are intercept, not direct. Confirming non-impact solution for all 3 vessels. Correct. Window opens in 40 seconds. 22 seconds wide. 40 seconds. She had 40 seconds to decide whether 200 years of building in the dark was worth the moment it became real. Whether 60,000 dead at Kepler justified the weight of what she was about to start. Her brain had simplified the number. It did that sometimes. Protective compression. She corrected it deliberately, the way she always corrected it. 60,000. She held it until it was the right size, then she let it go. Authorized firing sequence. Authorization Voss Sierra 7. Lance sequence armed. 28 seconds. One of the targeting technicians made a very small sound, somewhere between an exhale and something else, and then was quiet. 20. 15. 10. Voss thought about her grandfather's supply invoice, framed on the wall of her quarters. The equations on the back, high school physics. The same equations taught to children on every Consortium world, because the universe ran on the same physics everywhere, and the physics did not care about political boundaries. 5, 4, 3, 2. She did not close her eyes. The lance fired. No sound. A deep electronic pulse her instruments recorded, and her body didn't feel. And then the rods were gone, already moving too fast to track directly, visible only as projected green lines on the display extending from the ridge toward the black of space at a velocity the computers could only approximate. The rods crossed the pale boundary at second 3. The dreadnought sensors would be reading them now, or trying to. No energy signature, no exhaust plume, no particle wake. Just mass arriving at a velocity that Consortium sensor doctrine had never anticipated. Her analysts had concluded the dreadnoughts would detect the rods approximately 4 seconds before impact. 4 seconds. At that speed, that was 8 kilometers. You cannot maneuver a dreadnought 8 kilometers in 4 seconds. What you can do is watch. The first and third rods passed precisely through their intercept vectors, through empty space, exactly as calculated. Close enough that the kinetic disturbance of passing mass at that velocity would register on every sensor as a category of event for which they had no category. The second rod was correct. The honored doctrine was not. Kale's withdrawal order had been issued late, but it had been issued. The time's sovereign's reach and the meridian of law had held their vectors, the vectors where the solution placed the intercepts. But the honored doctrine's captain had panicked. Had burned thrust in the wrong direction, trying to escape something he couldn't see clearly and didn't understand, and moved the ship not out of the intercept vector, but slightly through it. A tungsten composite rod the size of a transit bus, traveling at 4.2% the speed of light, hitting a dreadnought glancing along the forward port quarter. It did not destroy the ship. It removed the forward port quarter cleanly, precisely in the way that physics removes things when applied with sufficient mathematics and sufficient speed. Weapon systems, sensor arrays, crew quarters. The primary communications tower simply ceased to be part of the ship and became a debris field traveling in a slightly different direction. Casualties, Voss said. Marco looked at his screen. 3 seconds of silence. 11 crew. 11. Voss closed her eyes. 2 seconds. She opened them. 11 was not 60,000. She knew that. She had known it before she authorized the shot and had authorized it anyway, because the alternative was another generation of people living inside a line someone else drew. Because the only language the Consortium had ever actually heard was the language of consequence. She knew all of that. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds anyway, because 11 was also 11. She held the number at the right size. Then she set it down carefully, in the same place she kept 60,000. Send the treaty counterproposal, she said. Full text, all amendments, and a formal expression of regret regarding the navigational incident to the honored doctrine, copied to Velhari Imperial Command. She meant the regret completely. She also meant the treaty completely. She had drafted it because when this was over, and the Consortium understood what the geometry had changed to, there needed to be something real to move toward. Regret and determination are not opposites. Kale sent the emergency broadcast on 17 frequencies simultaneously, personally, because that was how every intelligence director and emperor in the compact would know, before reading a single word of the report, that something had changed. In his study, Drever laid out what they had actually seen: 3 tungsten composite rods. 17,000 kilograms each. Velocity at intercept, 4.2% light speed. Each one carrying the kinetic energy of a tactical nuclear device. No exotic fuel, no detectable energy signature, no licensed technology. Where were they fired from? Equatorial Ridge. The cylindrical structures. Drever paused. I've been running Mirror Colony's power consumption data. The Ridge installation consumed power consistent with industrial operations. Nothing would have indicated weapon systems to anyone not specifically looking. Anyone specifically looking, she didn't answer, which was an answer. Long has that installation been operational? The Mirror Ridge installation appears to have been started 41 years ago. She turned her tablet to face him. On the screen was a map, 17 Terran colony systems inside the pale, and across them, a series of points that looked at individually meant nothing. Looked at together, they formed a pattern that was very clear, very large, and had been hiding in the Consortium's own filed survey data for decades. 41 years is the youngest, Drever said. The Ganymede facility, the primary system, shows tunneling activity that began 207 years ago. Kale looked at the date. 207 years ago was 11 years after the quarantine was established. In total, Drever said, I estimate between 80 and 90 functional installations distributed across 14 Terran colony systems, all inside the pale, all built using technologies that appear individually to be standard industrial equipment, all capable, if they follow the same principle as Mirror Colony, of reaching any point in Terran space, and a substantial volume beyond the pale boundary. Kale was very still. The pale was a line on the map, the boundary drawn to keep the quarantine orderly, to give everyone a clear visual of where human space ended. On one side, everything else. On the other side, 87 installations that Drever had found in the Consortium's own filed survey records, which no one had looked at as a pattern, because no one had thought there was a pattern worth looking for. Why did no one see this? Because we were not looking for it. We assessed humans against what we expected them to develop. We looked for exotic energy systems, FTL research, armament types consistent with Consortium military architecture. Drever paused. We did not look for kinetic mass drivers. We consider them a primitive technology. We moved past that phase 600 years ago. Humans have been working on it for 2, because there was nothing else for them to work on. All the other paths were restricted. The cage, Kale thought, he had built the cage to limit what they could become. He had built it out of everything, except the physics they already had, because physics belongs to the universe and cannot be quarantined. And somehow, in 200 years of detailed intelligence work, no one had thought carefully enough about what happens when a species with documented persistence and documented adaptability is left alone in a box with access to fundamental physics, and a reason to be angry. He went to his filing archive and searched for the formal human protest filed after the Kepler colony embargo. He found it, opened it, read through to the end. There was a paragraph near the end he had read before and dismissed as rhetoric. He read it again now. It said in the careful neutral language of professional diplomats who knew their words would be filed and forgotten, that Terran Authority formally requested the Consortium recognize the right of human colonies to develop and maintain defensive systems proportionate to demonstrated threats. that this right was inherent in the colony charter, that Terran authority intended to exercise this right as a matter of policy going forward. He looked at the date on the protest. 162 years ago, 162 years ago, humans had filed a formal notice, correct language, correct channels, correct format, and then continued building while the Consortium continued ignoring them. Every piece of it was in the Consortium's own data, visible to anyone who read it as a whole instead of in separate departmental assessments, each with its own category for human development, none connecting to the others. The Consortium had not been outsmarted, it had not been deceived. It had done what large, comfortable empires do when they look at smaller, contained things. It had assumed the smaller thing was doing what it had always done, and had not looked too hard, because looking too hard implied the possibility of finding something, and finding something would require a response, and the comfortable position was that no response was required. He had spent his career believing the quarantine was mercy. It was not a lie he had told himself. He had genuinely believed it, had defended it for 2 centuries as the humane position, the moderate one. He sat with what 200 years of humane quarantine had produced, in the dark where no one had looked carefully enough. Then he pulled up the treaty counterproposal Voss had sent. He read it, all of it. Equitable revenue provisions, oversight clauses, renegotiation terms every 5 years. It was a fair document. Genuinely fair. He read it twice to be certain. He was not misreading it. 6 months later, it rained in Geneva. Real rain, grey, persistent, the kind that made the streets dark and the lake flat. Admiral Voss stood at the window of the UN Assembly building and looked at it. She had a cup of coffee she hadn't drunk. In 6 months, the Consortium had convened an emergency assembly, commissioned 17 reports on human technological development, issued a statement calling the Mirror incident a navigational error by the honored doctrines capped.